First of all, thank you very much for joining us again in this other series of the Nuclia RAG Academy. And in this case, we are going to talk about how to prompt LLMs for RAG. This is a topic that we've been asked a lot of times, and a lot of our customers and non-customers, they are asking a lot about the best ways to use prompting together with RAG to get better RAG outputs or to avoid some specific behaviors. So this is what are we going to cover today. And I'm especially happy as well because today with me I have Carmen. Carmen is our prompting master in Nuclia. She is our lead machine learning engineer. And if someone in the team knows about prompting and how to trick LLMs, she's the one. So she will be sharing her wisdom with us today. So Carmen, good afternoon. Thank you for joining us today. So before we get started, it's important to understand why prompting is relevant for RAG. And to understand why prompting is relevant, we would like to explain again a bit of the journey that a RAG pipeline has, so you understand exactly where the LLMs enter into the game and where the prompting also gets into the game. So what you have here, it's a very basic diagram on what happens when somebody asks a question in a RAG pipeline. So everything begins with a question. So once the user asks a question, we go to NucliaDB to retrieve the right data to answer what the user is looking for. And once we get from the database what information is necessary to answer the user, we send that information to the LLM, to the language model. Once we send that information to the language model generates with that specific context the answer, and together with the answer, we also use the prompt to answer in a specific way. So once we send the context to the language model to provide the output for the user, we are not only waiting for the model to provide us the answer, but we also set up the answer based on a prompt. And that's why it's very important to understand that setting up the right prompt, it's very important at the end of the day to provide the right answer to the user. So this is a very schematic diagram, but it was important for us to share with you as a setup of this session for you to understand where the prompt mainly affects the output for the user when it comes to a RAG pipeline. So now that we understand a bit better how where the prompt is taking place in a RAG pipeline, maybe Carmen, I would like to start asking you why it matters. So now we understand where the prompt is placed, but why it matters to have a right prompt.
Well, I'm glad you asked this question. Now that it's a bit more clear, the role that the prompt plays, particularly in RAG, there are things that you need to achieve to have your custom behavior, because you want your RAG to work in a certain way. On one hand, you want to avoid hallucinations. This is almost for everyone that use RAG. Like you don't want your model to answer with anything that is not in your data. And these specific constraints are something that you need to add in your prompt. And also for some more complex cases that Eudal will describe in a bit, it's also useful to get specific custom behaviors for other tasks. Also, to set up constraints. There are things, rules and restrictions that you may want for your specific use case, and this is where you need to work on them. Like, for example, I don't want these kind of words to be mentioned in my answer. If the topic is this, just say, I cannot talk about this, I cannot mention this. And for customizations, personality, tone, you may want your assistant to be in the same style that you have your general company communication. And also the format. Like, imagine you always want your answer to be in bullet points or very descriptive or very friendly. So these are more or less like things that you can work with in your prompt to define to get what you exactly want. I don't know if this was clear, Eula.
Very clear. Thank you, Carmen. So basically, avoiding hallucinations, which is what we had like here. So a good prompt is to avoid hallucinations, to generate customization outputs, basically, and to set up constraints. So thank you, Carmen. So there is also an important thing for everyone to understand that in that case, specifically Nuclia, there is no a single place in which you can set up your prompt. In a RAG pipeline, especially with the new evolution of the RAG, where basically it's agents. So we start having several places inside the pipeline in which you can set up your own prompt. So probably the ones of you that are customers at Nuclia, you might be familiar that you can, when you select the LLM that you would like to work together with, you can define the prompt and the system prompt of the LLM that you have decided. So this is probably where you are most familiar in which you can define the prompt. But there are several other places in which you can add your own prompt, and making sure that you structure the prompt in a way that Carmen will cover later, it's important. So besides being able to define the prompt of the LLM, the general prompt and the system prompt, in the search, you also have a way where you can prompt the rephrase query of the user. So you have a prompt in which you can fine-tune the way you would like the rephrase of the user to be. There is also another place in Nuclia in which you can define your specific prompt, which is at the time of extracting data when you start indexing data in the platform. So this is a new functionality. You might not be yet familiar with it, but for the ones of you that you deal usually with specific, very complex templates, like templates with tables or templates with specific formatting that you would like to extract in a better way, you can also define your prompt using visual LLMs. So, or you can also define your prompts at the time you would like Nuclia to identify tables in your documents. And there is also another way in which you can define your prompts in Nuclia, which is at the time you define the agents. So right now we have the labeler, the generator, the graph extraction, and the and a way to generate Q&As. So each of those agents also provide a way to define your own custom prompt. So it's important for you to understand that a RAG pipeline, it has several areas in which you can, as Carmen defined before, you can play with to make sure that you get the right outputs. So, Carmen, now that we know that we have several places in which we can define the prompt, could you help us understand a bit better what is relevant when we build our prompt?
Yeah, of course. Well, the first thing is that you need to make peace with the fact that you need to iterate and experiment. You could get the perfect prompt in one go, but it's unlikely. So you just need to try, play around, and experiment with different prompts, different formats, and refine based on your results. We'll explain a bit later also. You also need to ground your prompt. What do we mean with grounding your prompt? So before you start writing, you need to make sure of the functionality that you want to achieve. So for that, you need to either write it down, discuss with a colleague, even use AI as we will show. So, but first you need to make sure that you know what you want to express. And then also be clear, specific, and concise. We as humans have a lot of context when someone is explaining something, but the models do not. So your language needs to be very clear and very unambiguous. This is why lawyers are great at prompting, because they're used to using very, very specific language. And also for this, it's also useful to use Markdown or XML, because that helps us define ways of our language to be more structured. Also, again, the structure. We need to make our prompt in a way that has very well-defined sections. An introduction in which to explain what the model needs to do, sections and an outro in which we prompt the model to give us whatever answer or whatever behavior we want to. Other things, as we mentioned before, guidance in the format, specify which tone and style you want, and you, in a RAG context, always remember to provide the context. Is this clear, more or less, Eudal?
It's clear, but maybe providing a list of the things that we have to consider, it might not be that useful. So how we should get started. So now we know a bit the areas and how we should structure everything, but could you recommend some tooling or some resources in which you could recommend to everyone to start understanding and exploring?
Yeah, sure. So on one hand, I really recommend reading the guides, the prompting guides that big companies like Anthropic, OpenAI, and the prompting guide.ai have, that are awesome, and they will help you understand in way more detail than we give in these like 20 minutes, the things that you need to take into account and what is important and things that you could try. But also there are like amazing tools like the prompt generator of Anthropic, and OpenAI also has one in which you describe your task and then it generates a prompt. For this, you also need to remember that you need the previous step in which you think about exactly what you want to do.
So here we are showing what just Carmen was explaining. So in that case, Anthropic offers a very easy way to create your own prompt. And it's as easy as defining what you want to achieve. And Anthropic suggests you a prompt, a very detailed one that you can use as a starter point if you don't want to start from scratch. So yeah, we recommend, if you have the chance, to test it because it's very useful, and it can be a very good starting point. So let's go back to the presentation. Sorry, here we go. So thank you, Carmen, for sharing the resources and especially the Anthropic tooling, and OpenAI it also have a very similar one, so it might be useful. But again, those are tools that are good to start understanding the foundations of prompting in RAG, but probably it would be useful if you can just walk us through a basic RAG template and explain the different steps that we can follow.
Yeah, sure. Well, in this case, as I mentioned before, the structure is important, and it can vary. It can be different from one case or another. And here we are just setting out an example that we use. It works for us and is quite flexible, so you can play around with it. So the first thing that we do is an intro, as we said before, the description of the task. We specify the model exactly what we want to do, what is its role, and what we want to achieve. The second thing that we do is to provide context. Context could be more information about the task, or in a RAG context, it's the documents, the info from the documents that we want to use. Input data, it could also be the context, but it can be the question. In our case, we're going to define it as the question. And a series of steps and rules. Sometimes if they are very specific, this is where we can add examples of what we want it to do. And then output and extra considerations. Here, we just prepare our exit from the prompt. We say, okay, now that you've done this, answer my question with this, this, and this, and taking this into account. It's like our final message to the model. But maybe if we see, exactly, thank you, that. So here is like a prompt of us, a very simple template, dissected. So here you have the description of the task in which we specify to the model that it's a RAG assistant, that its purpose is to answer, it needs to leverage the context and only the context and basic stuff. Then we provide the context. As I said before, it could be the description of the task. We could give more information about the kind of assistant that it is. Input data, the question that we want to pass, and then a series of step of rules. Do not use only the provided context, do not add outside of or external knowledge. These are the things that we will usually describe to avoid hallucination. And also some behaviors like, if there's not enough information, I want you to reply with this. and things like you can make minor deductions. You can see here that everything is written in Markdown. And for example, we use like the asterisk to point out the things that are more relevant. I don't know if this is more clear like this, Eldad?
Yeah, it's clear. So what I'm getting from what you're explaining is that using asterisk and making sure that we add the context, the question, and basically making sure that we explain to the model what we want as an ideal output. This is something that it's a must to make sure we get the best output possible out of our RAG pipeline. Is that right, Carmen?
Yeah, exactly. The more precise and the more structured you are, the better.
Great. So let's because some of the conversations we're having with our customers, they are a bit afraid on testing different prompts, and because they are afraid about the output. So you always say to me, don't panic, baby steps. So can you explain what do you mean by this?
No, like I think it's one of the first things that we say in the seminar, and I think it's very important. Like, do not expect that you're going to get the best prompt straight away. This is a process, and you'll need to iterate, and it will be very important, and it will be a learning process. So these are just like the normal pipeline that we follow and that we encourage you to follow when designing a prompt. So the first thing, as I said before, you need to write down your goals, examples, restrictions, and anything that is relevant for building your prompt. You could even, as we said before, tell a colleague, like, okay, this is what I want to achieve. Does it make sense? And once you have this, you have your idea, draft your initial prompt. You can use a model to do it. You can do it yourself. You can use a template, any tool that could be useful for you. Then, since you have your series of examples, you can test the prompt. And then, is the prompt good enough? If it's not good enough, then we go to the step of refining the prompt. This, you can do it manually. If it's tricky, you can ask us. Also, a very good tool is asking the same model that you're using how to make your prompt better for a specific situation. So some sort of meta prompting. And then if the answer is like, yeah, it's good enough, you start using the prompt and everyone's happy until somebody complains. And one thing that is very important, store your good or bad prompts, because it will be useful. It will be useful to know what worked for you, and it will be useful to know what didn't work. And I think that's about it. Is the process clear?
It's very clear. And you said something that it might be very relevant to all of us, which is that if in our RAG pipeline we are using a specific model, OpenAI or Anthropic or whatever, DeepSeek, it might be a good idea to ask to the model to write the prompt for you. So that trick, the meta prompting, this is very useful. And in that way, you would be really defining the prompt in the best way for the specific model that you are using. And we've seen this to work very well. And it's really improving the quality of the prompt together. And that means that the quality of the output. Let's see now some examples of bad prompting in Nuclia. Those are real examples from prospects or customers that you usually see, and they are sometimes the most usual mistakes that we see. So in that case, we have a question, which is what is climbing, and in here we have defined Nuclia to use a specific prompt. So that means that out of the box, in our case, we provide a specific prompt that it's tailored by us, but sometimes our customers want to use a specific prompt. So in that case, that users decide to use a specific prompt. So removing the prompt that we are using, and the specific prompt the user adds to the prompt section, it's answer my question using the context. In here, we see that question it's written under brackets, but context it's not written under brackets. That means then that the model does not get the context because we have not defined what the context is. So it's very, very important Carmen covered this before, to define very well what is the question and what is the context. And the way to show and to explain to the model, to the LLM, what is the question and what is the model is by defining under brackets what is the question and what is the context. So this is a very usual mistake. Every single time you write a prompt, you have to define the question and the context under brackets. Sorry, Carmen, you want to add something?
Yeah, I think Pierre was asking what is the context in Nuclia. So,
Okay.
well, yeah. So the context in Nuclia is what we retrieve from your data. Is what all of your results, in whichever way you've defined, it can be like paragraphs, it can be full resources, that all of that information is the context. So where you place context in your prompt, that's where all of the info that we retrieve from your data will go. Is it more clear?
Okay. We hope it is clear.
It is. Yeah, so context is world retrieval results. Yeah, more or less.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. So another example of prompts that basically did not avoid hallucinations. As remember that one of the things that it's very important when prompting in RAG, it's avoiding hallucinations. So a way to, and this in that case we are showing a mistake in which is that again we have a question from a user, which is what is carambing. We can see here that we have a much longer answer from Nuclia. And if we check the prompt, we can see that the prompt says, answer my question using the context. In that case, we are not restricting the model. So we are jumping, we are avoiding the prompt that we already have in Nuclia by defining the user prompt. And in that case, our customer did not make clear to the model that the model should answer only, exclusively, with the information in the context. So in that case, the model is answering based on the context, based on the retrieval that we are providing, but since the model, it has a lot of knowledge by its own, it's adding to the question, to the answer, sorry, not only the information from the context, but also the information that the model knows by its own. So it's very important once you define your own prompt, if you want to avoid hallucinations, to make very clear that the model should only use the information provided in the context, nothing else, not general knowledge from the model.
Can you show us what the correct answer is? How would you write this then differently then, so it's the correct way?
Carmen, go ahead, please.
No, I was going to say that's the next slide.
Sorry about that. Sorry, I'll be quick.
So yeah, Thomas, in that specific, this is exactly the same question, the same context, everything. What we can see in here is that we built a much more structured prompt. So you can see here the asterisks that Carmen was mentioning before. And we can see here that we made very explicit that never include information that is not explicitly mentioned in the context. So that's a way to restrict the model to only answer based on the context. And we also made very clear that the context should be under brackets to make sure that the model is only aware and using the information in the retrieval in the context to answer that specific question. So we are going to share those slides with you if you are interested. So you have you have all the prompts and you have everything written. But it's very important if we compare this example with the previous ones to make sure to be very explicit on the model to use only the information in the context and to really specify the context under brackets. So that's the best practice when providing, when writing your own prompts. And this is the best practice we recommend to all of you.
Perfect. Is it clear? Well, I think there are some questions from Dimitri I don't know if we want to answer them now or at the end.
Dimitri, if it's okay for you, we are going to wait a minute before start answering you, and let's go to the end. So we have now explained a bit the best way to structure the prompts, making sure that the prompt is not hallucinating, and even how you can structure the output in the tone or in the structure that you would like to have. But Carmen, other bits and bobs, what do you recommend?
Well, these are just other things that we wanted to mention, just so that you have them in your mind and in your toolbox, even if we don't fully explain them here. One thing is that for complex tasks that need user interaction or user customization, we use a fixed prompt with rules. Like, for example, Eudal was mentioning at the beginning, the extraction of tables or the extraction of documents visually. So for that, at least in Nuclia, what we do is to provide the users a set of rules. Like, we have our very specific prompt that we've tailored and we've worked on it for very long. And then for users to be able to customize it, we just offer them that they can input a set of rules that then we'll inject in our prompt. And that's very useful for us. So maybe for some cases that you need customization could be useful for you. Another thing is to use JSON output or like function calling or something like that when you need a structured output, very defined. Like, okay, I need from an invoice, I always need to get this part, and this part. For this recurrent, like using a structured output is the best. Also, I said it before, but I'll say it a million times, keep track of your prompts. This is very important. And the last, ask us. We are always happy to help. We are happy to like look into your problems. And it's like, it's also quite fun. So don't hesitate.